little behind the scenes shop talk. Yeah.
Well, I guess we should introduce ourselves, though.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's do it. You
Okay,
go first.
I'll go first. Okay. All right, so my name is Jake Allen. I'm a touring musician from Northern Michigan. I spend most of my time on the road, traveling around to as many countries and places that I can to share my music. And I also work as a clinician for Takamine Guitars, which is a Japanese guitar builder, and they kind of send me around to sing the praises of their instruments while I also do my own thing. And of course, this is all when the world is actually operating. This is what I do. Right now, I do stuff in the studio here. I do live streams, and I'm about to release a new record, so I'm working on the release campaign and kind of trying to be a virtual musical aid for people in a time of definite need for such a thing. So.
I fumble through the shadows and cast a crooked smile. I'm quicksanding, I hypnotize. I figured you could sleep a while.
Yeah, that's basically me in a nutshell.
Well, I'm Jay Nichols. I'm a big fan of this guy and his music. And I'm a marine biologist by training, but I've been thinking a lot over the past decade about the emotion, particularly emotional health, the social health, and wellness benefits of water in all of its forms. So whether it's your bathtub or an ocean and anything in between. I'm interested in how spending time near, in, on, and underwater can help us be better versions of ourselves. In fact, even heal some of the things that are broken in us and each other.
The best way to understand blue mind is to first understand red mind. We're anxious, we're stressed, and that takes its toll. You're going to break down, you're going to fall apart. That's where blue mind comes in. Water is really the basis of life. We are all made of mostly water. We all spent the first 9 months of our lives swimming around in this dark watery pool called our mother. You need water to survive, but you also need water to thrive. Getting us more towards a blue mind state is really important for our personal health, for the health of our families, our communities, and even our country. We get so much from the waters of the world, and we have so much we can give back. And when that connection starts to flow, amazing things can happen.
Recently, we've started these chats where we've been kind of exploring that intersection between music and water and the mind and the brain and our emotions. And we thought, let's record these conversations. And that combination of blue mind in your hands, shared with the people who listen to you and love your music can really be useful. And I think in your own story, the broad story, but also the specific events where you put blue mind into practice knowingly or just instinctively, unknowingly. I think it's probably safe to say will improve lives and maybe even occasionally save a few lives. Not to get deep right out of the gate here, but there you go.
Well, yeah, I mean, you mentioned me using blue mind in the past for music stuff. I mean, it's cool to put kind of a name and a title to that state of being, which I hadn't even considered before we started talking. And a lot of the most poignant songs that I've written have been written while I'm sitting near a body of water, or just getting off of a day that was filled with water activities and stuff like that. And it's a huge health benefit, a huge creativity benefit, but I think it's something that, I mean, at least me, I've taken it for granted and never really thought about, oh, maybe the water is somehow connected to this. And after learning about blue mind and seeing it as a very real state that we enter into when we're near or in water, it's like, okay, well, now that I know what this is, how can I further harness this as a creative edge and as a a way to lead a healthier life. And it's no surprise that the way that you and I met was through a water connection. I was actually swimming in Lake Michigan with my dear friend Judy, and she's a big fan of your book, and she was telling me about the book. She had been for a while, but we really had an in-depth conversation while we were just swimming in the lake near the dunes, and we just really nerded out on this whole Blue Mind thing. And then a couple of days later, I was talking with one of my sponsors at this company called Tonewood Amp, and we got into some talks about this music video that I'm trying to release, and trying to release it in a way that's cohesive with water and with platforms that are kind of water conscious. And she said, you should talk to my friend, Dr. Wallace J. Nichols. And I was like, wait a second, the Blue Mind guy? Like the guy who wrote the book? That's kind of weird. We're just having this big talk about you in the water. And so I reached out to Jay, and we kind of jumped on the phone and just hit it off, and it felt like this synchronistic kind of meant to be blossoming of a relationship. So
Yeah.
So water brought us together, essentially.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned your music and the occasions that your music themes refer to water, but also that the water set you up for that flow, right? That creative flow. Give me some specifics. I want names of songs. I want places and stories. I think folks listening will appreciate that as well. And then they can dive in to your library a bit and listen to like take your story and kind of understand your music a little bit more. So give me some examples of that.
Yeah, so probably one of the most recent ones is I traveled to Lithuania a couple years ago with a group of artists called Take Me to the River. And they are painters, digital media artists, and they're from all around the world. And I like to consider myself the musician outcast of the group because I'm the only musician. But once a year, we jump around to a different city in the world, somewhere interesting that has artists in the community, where we go and collaborate and we do an exhibit. And so my last kind of really poignant Blue Mind experience was going there and spending time near the Baltic Sea. And my contribution to our project in Lithuania was written in the dunes next to the sea. And I was trying to, I was kind of forcing things before I went out there, and I was hitting a lot of brick walls. And I found myself sitting in the dunes and kind of like just in awe of my surroundings, and then things just kind of started to flow, and I ended up writing this song for the project called Color in the Gray, which coincidentally, gray mind, blue mind, I mean, it kind of fits into the color themes of that. But anyhow, I mean, that was definitely one experience where I felt like being next to that body of water was a very much an advantage for sparking creativity. But there was one other situation with a song that I wrote called Ascension, and I was in Tucson, Arizona. And at the time I had been going through an existential crisis, basically. I just left home for the first time. My life was starting, I was about 19 years old. And I was trying to figure out ways to change my kind of disposition of having this, felt like a film between me and the rest of the world, like this disconnect. And I was struggling with it until I started to kind of alchemize it into music. And the moment that began was sitting by a pool in Tucson. And the song just kind of started to flow and take shape. And that was the song that really set the barometer for this entire record that I created, which was a tool to kind of bring me back down to a more grounded place. And, I didn't recognize it at the time that being by the water might have had a serious effect on what I was creating. And, now that we've been talking, I look back at all of these experiences of writing by water, and it's really more defined in my mind now as a real thing that we can use to generate creativity, to generate well-being. And I'm excited now. I'm excited to move forward and use it. I want to go write my next album on a lake.
But it's great to hear from a practicing, active, creative artist like yourself, making that, where the rubber hits the road. Really, it's like, and your music really is the proof of concept. So there's this other aspect of it. So you touched on gray mind and red mind and blue mind. So red mind is sort of our, maybe distracted, but really active, very fight or flight response to the world, which is right now is kind of our normal in our modern society. Technology, 24/7 news cycle, traffic, sirens, just busyness, lack of sleep, perhaps. There's a purpose to red mind. The anxiety that goes and the stress that goes with striving towards success, I guess you could say. But one of the outcomes, if you're stuck in red mind, is what I refer to as gray mind, which is burnout and breakdown. And so when we were talking about like red mind and gray mind are also part of the creative process and feed into the narrative of your lyrics. And if it was just blue mind all the time, you would be like this Spicoli character, like just, hey dude, cat, awesome waves,
floating.
It'd just be like chill. So you kind of need, it's inevitable. Red mind's inevitable as part of our lives. Gray mind is probably worth avoiding. And I used to think avoid it at all costs, but in our conversations, I realized that gray mind place of just, it might even manifest as mild or severe depression even, has always been in the tradition of art and music and creative people, has always been part of the experience. Almost not, and I'm going to be careful because it really is terrible. Really. Sorry, sirens going by here. Little red mind illustration. And you wouldn't wish that on anyone, but some really tremendous insight. In fact, some in musical insight, poetic insight, some of the great novels and paintings of all time have come from that struggle and from that dipping into gray mind and then coming back to blue mind and maybe even into red mind productivity. And your insights into that have, expanded my thinking. I would have said, hey, stay out of gray mind, toggle between red and blue mind. That's better, but avoid gray mind at all costs. But there are lessons to be learned from that burnout and breakdown, however it comes. So I'm carefully treading into, I'm not making a recommendation that we also actively pursue gray mind.
Right.
I think we don't need to actively pursue it. It's going to happen to all of us in some way.
Yeah. Well, the thing about, being creative and being in the arts, I think anybody who has some form of outlet, whether it be a writer, a musician, painter, anything, they can alchemize that gray mind state into something that is, that lives in that blue mind mentality. They take their struggle and they use it as fuel, which in turn, not only does it help you to get out of the gray mind state, but then you also have, you end up with this thing at the end that is positive and ultimately, a very blue mind friendly result. So as long as you're conscious of where your brain is, whether it is in the red mind or gray mind state, and you kind of have this overarching allegiance to the blue mind in a way, you can use those states to reap benefits from it. And it's definitely no secret that most artists, you know, they struggle with lots of things like, you know, mental boundaries or mental obstacles that they need to get through, and they use their art as the way to do it. So I think that for the right person, you know, gray mind, being in that gray mind state, if harnessed correctly, can actually be a positive thing. But it's not a place you would want to live for any extended amount of time. That's for sure.
Yeah, I think it kind of is a reminder that whether you're, you know, a professional artist or musician, or just someone who has an interest in art and music and nature and, you know, all other aspects of let's just call it Blue Mind. It's such a good set of tools to have available because we're all inevitably, especially in this extremely bright red-minded mode that we're in right now, we're all going to dip in and out of the gray. And if you don't go into that prepared, you may make poor choices like, you know, substance abuse or other ways of dealing with the negative emotions that create more negative emotions that take you further away from a state of wellness. So you can numb the pain and treat your own depression and with drugs or alcohol or, you know, bad activities, but that's not going to fix anything. In fact, probably create more red and gray mind. But if we go into the inevitable struggles of life with a robust toolkit that says, hey, art and music and water can be useful if you find yourself, you know, over anxious or burnt out. And I think that's probably the broad goal that we share is to let just anybody listening know that put these concepts in your toolkit when you feel cruddy or you feel over anxious. You know, use music and use water as a way, you know, both. But even at the same time, sit by the pool and pull out the guitar, sit by the lake or go to the beach and sing, you know, sing to the water as a way to calm yourself, connect with your friends, your loved ones, and, you know, heal yourself. And I think, you know, we're both fortunate to have figured that out, but I didn't learn it in school.
Yeah. What originally drew you to the concept of making Blue Mind a defined thing that you can talk about and put a title on?
You know, so I'm trained as a marine biologist. Is sort of my background. I became a marine biologist because this is my guess. I felt better in the water as a kid. I was an introvert. I stuttered. I was adopted. I had sort of life on land was not my favorite. So in the water, I felt more whole. Underwater, I felt better. So when I learned that there's this thing called a marine biologist, I was like, sign me up for that. I mean, a profession that puts me underwater or in the water or near the water, because I felt better. People don't ask you questions underwater. Therefore, you don't need to answer questions or speak. Therefore, you don't need to stutter. And as a kid, I was in speech therapy and all this stuff. And so speaking was scary. So I tried to avoid it. And it was just funny because I speak a lot now. So I became a marine biologist. And then throughout my career, as I always noticed, like people felt better. People seemed better. People were happier by the water, including myself, like my whole life. And I wondered about it, and I wanted to read a book about it. And when I went looking for the book that I wanted to read, I couldn't find it. I mean, maybe similar, like you go looking for a song you want to listen to and it doesn't exist, so you have to write the song.
Right.
That feeling, you know, you kind of have had that feeling, and maybe other musicians have too. Well, that was the case. And I was like, all right, I really want to read this book, and I want to apply it to my work because I think it could be useful. The book about your brain on water. And when I went looking for it, wasn't there. So I tried to get some other people to write it, some smart people, some neuroscientists. In particular, I pitched the idea to a neurologist named Oliver Sacks, whose work I really admired. And he actually wrote a book about your brain on music that I read. And great neurologist, passed away sadly a few years ago. Water lover. I thought, wow, if Dr. Sacks wrote the book about your brain on water, like the way he did about music, I would read the heck out of that book, and then I would use it. And I pitched the idea to him, and he said, that's a fine idea. You do it. And I pitched it to him in a way like, I will be your grunt worker. I will give you everything I have. I just want you to write the book so I can read it. And then he basically threw it back at me, and maybe, sort of offhandedly, but I took it very seriously. So it would be like your musical mentor telling you make an album of, make this album, Jake. And so it took me 5 years. I'm not a neurologist or a neuroscientist. I studied evolutionary biology and economics. And so I was like, wow, this is going to take some effort, but okay. So 5 years later, I delivered a signed copy of the book to him in New York. And he got his hands on it to read it before he passed away. And that was kind of like, I didn't really care about anything else. It's like Dr. Sacks said, write the book. It's written. Here, sir. Thank you for the, what's my next task, kind of. It was just, that is complete. It took 5 years. What shall I do now? And then it just sort of exploded, became a bestseller, and then it just has been translated in all these languages, and I find myself representing the idea as its, cheerleader in a way. But I credit Dr. Sacks with the propelling me in this direction. But I really I wanted to understand myself and those that I noticed around me more and better, and understand what it is about water that makes us feel the way it does. I think I named it right. Blue Mind makes sense, even though not all of the water that gives us this state is in fact the color blue. As we know, you travel around Michigan, you travel even around the oceans of the world. They're not all blue. Sometimes they're black or green or brown or shades, all the shades of colors. But the concept blue mind refers to water and our brains. And it turns out it's really useful. It's useful to educators. It's useful to health practitioners. It's useful to creative people like musicians and artists. It's useful to my colleagues who work on environmental issues to be able to describe the true value of a healthy lake or river or ocean. That includes the emotional health benefits, which have been left out almost entirely of the conversation. So, that's kind of how it started, a little bit by accident, or maybe in a vacuum. I wanted to read a book that didn't exist.
Yeah. Well, you saw the need for it, not just, for everybody, but I mean, for yourself. And there's a parallel with that, with, making records too, because it's like, to me, when I set out to make a record, I want to make the record that I want to hear. And it's something that, it doesn't exist yet, but I want it. I want to be able to consume it. And so you went down the same path, in the sense of, you saw the need, you had this passion, and then you kind of channeled this thing that is not only benefit for you, but a benefit for everybody. I mean, including me.
You remind me. I think there's a similarity. Writers and and people who write music, make music, have, there's this conversation about who you writing for, who's your reader, who's the listener, who's your muse, or what's your muse. And you go to like writer conferences or teach writing, and this comes up a lot, and it probably is true also in the music world. And when I know after thinking back on it, when I was writing Blue Mind, I was thinking every single day about the reader. It wasn't just I'm writing a book for myself. Obviously, I want to write a book that I would like to read, but I really was thinking daily about the reader and writing a book. I wanted it to feel like the book was written for the reader, my fellow water lovers. I wanted them to feel like, wow, this is speaking to me. This is speaking to my love of water in a way that helps me understand myself. And I was very conscious of that daily, like for every sentence of the reader. Also, obviously you're conscious of yourself, hopefully, in the process, but not all writers, and I imagine not all musicians take that perspective, and there was an empathy to it. I've been happy to hear on occasion from readers that I felt like you wrote the book for me. People have said that, and
I feel good to hear.
It's good to hear because I did. I mean, that's my answer is, well, I did write it for you. I didn't know your name, but I was thinking about you as I wrote it. And there are different reasons for writing. Sometimes it's just, you just have to get it out. You don't care who reads it. And sometimes you really are conscious of the reader or the listener, as the case may be. So I wonder about your writing process as a musician. Does it change? Do you think I'm writing this for hypothetical listener A?
Well, that's always been, I don't want to call it an issue, but my kind of default is, I start with writing what I need to write, and usually the ideas within that are pretty universal, and they're things that everybody's kind of going through in their head. I mean, a lot of it's really, it's kind of this cerebral stuff that isn't necessarily talked about a lot, but it's there in people most of the time. So there's this kind of, this resonance that it has with others, but at the same time, I am writing it as a therapy for myself. But then also you got to slip into the marketing mind and the thought of, okay, well, who is this for? And so there's a balance that's kind of written, but I always start with something that's like, this feels good to me. And there's a great producer actually named Michael Beinhorn who talks about that in his book called Unlocking Creativity. Really amazing book about music production and the deeper intent behind it. And he kind of has this belief that, he goes into a studio with a band and the band says, well, we want it to sound like this and we want it to cater to this audience. And he just like kind of wipes that idea out and says, no. We're going to make something that caters to you, something that you love. And because you love it, that's going to come through and that's going to resonate with other people. Not because you made a specific target that you were aiming it at, but because they can feel the authenticity in it. And that really resonated with me. But I mean, there is still that balance of packaging it in a way that fits into a market. And, for me, it's always been kind of on the cusp of certain markets per se, but there's always been this universal thing that feels like a market in itself almost. So, and that's really where my allegiance is to. It's not to a more capitalistic approach of selling records because,
Like an equation, the marketing equation or something.
Yeah, because it fits into the alternative bluegrass, funk, jazz, whatever, It's just a matter of this is some music that I think is good, and I think it's authentic, and I think there's a need for that today. So that's kind of my approach, but you know.
There's a concept that I've heard and I've repeated this idea, and I don't know who the author of the phrase is, but the idea is that the most personal is the most universal, which seems counterintuitive. You would think you want to, you know, the least common denominator would be the most vague and kind of, you know, watered down would be the most universal. But the more detailed and personal you get, it turns out it becomes even more universal. Kind of to your point, and when you get down into like what's going on in you, and even adding the details of the personal narrative to a lyric, or in my case to your writing, like the details, like really nitty gritty details, and it, you know, it's sort of like in the folk music tradition to you know, tell a story, but really get into the color of the shirt even, that makes it more universal rather than more nichey, and sort of, it's kind of counterintuitive, but it does work that way. And if you try to go for universal by really being really broad and really watered down, you kind of may lose it entirely.
Absolutely.
So, you know, so in your so we touched on a bunch of different topics in sort of your creative process, you know, the harnessing your red and gray mind moments and finding a way through them, but not ignoring them, alchemizing them into beauty, into art, using your environment, namely water, as a way to access your creativity, sort of, you know, taking your own emotions and not ignoring them, but, you know, and who you write for, who's your muse, and maybe it's writing for yourself initially, but then pivoting on that. But how do you start with words? Do you start with notes? Do you start with a vibe? Do you start with a theme? Like what is the seed of a song typically? I know it varies, but where do you find those seeds? Like, and how do you water them, so to speak?
Yeah. Well, you're right. It does vary immensely. I find myself, as far as from a technical approach, I usually start out with the music, and I try to make something that embodies a certain emotion, and then kind of ride off of that. But you know, there's also been situations where lately, I mean, I've been really into the idea of pulling stuff out of dream states, because, you know, sometimes I think all artists, you kind of dream of musical ideas, and then it's there was a time where I wanted to actually just make a record that was all pulled from dreams, which is a very ambitious approach that didn't end up working, but then you pull things from states like that, and you work with it and see, and a lot of the times when those come, they don't necessarily fit into your brand as an artist. But I mean, in a more grounded approach, yeah, starts with music, and then I start thinking of, well, what are these chords? What is this melody saying to me? And then usually it's just vowel sounds that come out on top of that, and then some of those stick, and it's kind of built from this musical foundation, and then these kind of just intuitive things on top of that end up coming around to this cohesive idea. But it's tapping into a state. I mean, the idea of creating, to me, is you're tapping in to a source. You're getting stuff from that source, running it through your own filter, and then in a way you're kind of giving back to the source. It's like this feedback loop. So there's a lot of things that happen that you don't necessarily feel in control of. Ideally, I mean, some of the best songs are to me are the ones that just kind of show up or are unveiled, rather than the songs that you sit down and try to write. And so getting into that flow state is definitely a huge advantage. to crafting a song that speaks universally, I think.
My impression, I'm not a music critic, or not, I'm barely a musician, but my impression of your music is I would describe it in terms of the richness. So the richness of the lyrics, your voice, but also your guitar playing is just like next level. Technically, it's like I'm hanging out way down at one end of the neck of the guitar, like in the basic. You're all over the place. Like you're just using almost every part of your body and every part of the guitar to make sound. And there's a richness to your music that I now understand from speaking with you, that reflects the richness of your inner life, your journey, your inquiries, your curiosity, your experiences, the complexity of your emotional life, your relationships. I think you probably would agree, you've been a fortunate human to have such a life, but your music makes more sense to me knowing you. There is a complexity to the way you play, and it makes sense to me that a guitar manufacturer would want you to hold their guitar in the presence of potential guitar buyers, to awe them into what is possible with the instrument. Makes me feel like a pre-kindergartner in terms of my guitar playing, when I listen to you or watch you and listen to you play.
No, but let me also say that the idea of something being, the cool thing about music is that, to me, there's never any better. There's just different.
Yeah,
It's like I can only be the best Jake that I can be, and Bob Seger can be the best Bob Seger, better than anybody else. So there's all these different these different perspectives on art being good. And I mean, when it came to starting to play the guitar like that and implementing all of these different things, it was never like, I want to do this because it's flashy or anything. It's like, I want to get more richness and more melody out of my instrument. What are some techniques I can employ to do that? And actually, the first guy that I saw that really inspired me in regards to acoustic guitar was a guy named Andy McKee. And I saw one of his videos for the first time in the early 2000s. And he did a lot of this kind of percussive, harmonic, these crazy technical, kind of savant playing styles. But I wasn't necessarily as drawn to that as I was drawn to his sense of melody and the richness he was able to pull out of the guitar by using those techniques. So that's always been I've always kind of thought that the guitar playing is kind of, I want to keep it more covert, as like, I don't want to be this guitar player that's doing all this crazy stuff. I want to be a songwriter that just happens to get there by that means,
Yeah. I don't think you're not playing the guitar with your teeth, fortunately, usually.
Not yet.
Typically. So, but short of that, I mean, it does, I tend to play, when I'm playing the guitar and picking songs, I tend to pick like Tom Petty, because he sticks to about 3 or 4 chords and his vocal range is similar to mine. So it's very safe, and it's very kind of like, way down here.
And it's very profound too. I mean,
yeah, and it is. And I'll say that, there's a simplicity and a profoundness to it. And then I listen to you. You sound like you're playing 5 guitars sometimes. I mean, literally, it's like, wow, who else is in the room? No, it's just Jake and his one guitar, which is, there's a mental aspect, and there's an intellectual aspect and a cognitive aspect to that suggests a high level of intelligence to be able to track all of that within yourself simultaneously, live. You know, I was just thinking, imagine you have fans that are like super geek, like staring at your hands playing like, at your shows, where they're just like staring at like how is he doing that? Like the you know, the men and women who are down in the weeds as far as the technical side, just transfixed and trying to figure out what the hell you're doing there. But it really is like your music, your lyrics, your playing demands full attention. It's not like chill background. It's like give Jake your full attention. Like, which in a way, like to speak to the Blue Mind theme, water does that too. Like you don't, if you're surfing or you're swimming, it's like you have to necessarily pay attention, or you can get yourself into trouble. And there's a level of losing yourself in your music because of that. Like there's a you know, kind of an ask that, hey, I'm going to play you a song. I'm going to ask for your undivided attention while I play, because it requires it to fully appreciate. You really want to be in the moment. It's not a multitasking request. It's a demand for attention that your music has. Which, you know, the downside of that could, I mean, like any activities on the water, it could be exhausting, because
Right.
it does, you know. And I'm sure you can switch into like, oh, I'm going to play some songs that will be less demanding of your attention. That
Right.
know,
And that's always been like, at least with the last couple of records I've made, it's always been this kind of underlying acoustic guitar, you know, craziness going on, but it's kind of masked in a pop song or just a good song. So it's like, if you really want to dive into it, you can, and you can nerd out on it. But I mean, a lot of the songs is just like, if you didn't know anything about music, you could just kick back and be like, oh, that's cool, little pop.
yeah, stay at the higher level. Yeah.
So that's always been, it's kind of and it's been semi-conscious, but it's also been a mix of kind of my influences production wise, you know, how I produce a record. It's usually kind of this pop mentality, so easy to digest, but if you really want to get into the nitty gritties, you can. And then, I mean, in regards to where that, you know, like a song like that, it's kind of demanding on the listener in a sense that, you know, you want to pay attention to what's going on, and it makes it difficult in today's musical landscape sometimes, because, you know, I always think of pop music today as kind of more like candy, like just like sweet tarts or something, where it's fun and it's enjoyable for a second, but there's no nutrition there. There's
the lasting benefit.
Yeah. Whereas, you know, pop music in the past has been a lot more, you know, there was a time when really great, wholesome, nutritious music was pop music. And I feel like I was born a little too late in that sense, because I want nutrients from my music, you know. I want something to really fill me up and give me some kind of inspiration and energy that I can ride on after hearing
You know,
it.
I was going to say, I don't think I said this before, but the first time I really dove into your music, one of the hits I got was like Rush, the band Rush.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's an influence at all, but a little bit of your voice, but also there's a complexity to their, I guess you could call it pop music, and there's a virtuosity to it and a depth and that I remember back in the day, like, you know, I had a little band that I played with, and some of the guys would really nerd out on Rush and get into it was a more complex thinking person's sort of the lyrics and the you know, there's more to it than a lot of the pop music. But that, you know, I don't know how that you would take that comparison. But
I mean, like my dad kind of when I was a kid, he was listening to progressive rock music, like not so much Rush, but Yes and Emerson, Lake and Palmer, Genesis, things like that, where it was very technically proficient music, and he was, he's a B3 organ player and pianist, and he's always been this kind of very musical, musical scholar-like thinking when it comes to music. So I grew up with that as kind of the foundation of the music that I was absorbing. And then in my teenage years, when I kind of, became a little rebel, I was picking up more heavy music. I was listening to bands like Nine Inch Nails and like Deftones and these kind of like way out of left field bands that, my dad found out what I was listening to, and he's just like, what the hell are you doing? this is garbage, because he's just like so set in his way of that music, that more kind of technical savvy music. But I was like, no, there's something here. There's an emotion that these bands are conveying that, even though it's not done with this crazy technical prowess, it's making me feel something. And I think that the music that I've made has been a testament to those things that I absorbed as a kid, from the crazy progressive bands to the more bands that are just trying to kind of hold back and create a mood rather than being so in your face. So I think there's always, to me, it's always fun to try to marry those things, try to marry simplicity with complexity, and give people something that, they could really dive into and dissect, and there's a lot there to unpack, or they could just listen to it and enjoy it passively. So one of my favorite people who do that actually is a guy named Trevor Rabin, who was part of Yes for a long time, and in the heyday of Yes in like the 60s and 70s, they were this big progressive band, and they were known for their intricate, crazy, long arrangements. And when Trevor Rabin came in, he kind of like took all of that and condensed it down into like Owner of a Lonely Heart, like this pop music, but he still maintained that musical integrity behind it.
The richness of it, yeah.
Yeah. So I always thought that was really, really cool. And he was always like a big role model as far as production to me, and keeping complexity covert rather than right up in your face.
Well, I heard Yes play at a big show. I was an exchange student in Madrid, and it was a big stadium, and I heard them play a show there, and it was really great. So I was going way back, but I have a spot in my heart for their music and nostalgia.
Remember what year that was?
Would have been 80. Yikes! Wow, 84.
Okay.
83,
yeah, so it was probably in the Trevor Rabin era.
Yeah, totally, absolutely. I was an exchange student in high school in Spain, so anyway, that's my Yes story.
Nice.
Yeah, you'd say that simplicity and complexity ties a bit into. When you're by the water, there's a simplicity to it, but there's also a lot going on. And psychologists refer to something called soft fascination. There's a lot going on by the water, visually and auditorily, but it's also simplified compared to most of our terrestrial experiences. So when you're at the lake, especially if you're in the water, somatically, the water is supporting you, so you're coordinating less of your body. You're floating. Let's just say you're floating. Visually, it's simplified. It's just the view of the lake. Let's just say Lake Michigan. But there is some complexity to the wavelets and the colors. And then auditorily, you're mostly just hearing the sound of the water, which again is simplified, but there's a complexity to it. And then you get a lot of your bandwidth back for processing. So that simplicity there's less information to process. There's the spoken word, it goes away. The traffic, the built environment goes away. So it's, psychologists refer to soft fascination. And so if you're achieving that through music, that your people can get lost in your music, get pulled in, and then explore, have their own thoughts while you're portraying what you want to portray. There's just these interesting parallels between the psychology, neuropsychology of the musical experience and the Blue Mind experience that I really enjoyed talking about with you, and sort of like figuring things out as we go.
Yeah. Now, I always think that it's that's cool. I mean, like the profound, physiological effects that water is having on somebody that they don't even know about. It's such an interesting contrast to just the simplicity of just being in the water. Mm-hmm. And the same with a song. I think, like, there's a lot going on, but there's this space that hopefully, if it's a good song, the listener can put themselves in and kind of feel what it's like in that song, where there's all this stuff kind of going on in the background that is wildly complex, but you don't really need to think about it because you're just in this state.
Yeah, and there are surprises in the song, but it's not wall-to-wall surprises. So just like when you're out on the water, maybe there's a bird, maybe there's a boat, maybe there's a dolphin or a fish, maybe there's a few surprises, but it's interspersed in kind of a calmness, and that's the rhythm, the chorus, the verses. There may be some surprises, but there's also a pattern that that lulls the listener into that pattern, whatever it may be. Get used to it in the first minute or two, and then you kind of get into the song, and then there's maybe a few surprises along the way that stand out, but similar in that sense, that that soft fascination that brings us in. We relax into it, and then get to have our own emotions, as thanks to you're the guide as the performer or the musician and the songwriter, and then you get to have your own emotions in that space. So it's very similar in practice to spending time out on the water. I think, yeah.
Yeah. Well, in a broad perspective too, I mean, there's a lot of parallels between, Blue Mind, Red Mind, Gray Mind, and like these places that you go off. If you consider Blue Mind the source, and then you kind of go in these, sometimes surprising, maybe unpleasant places, but then you always take it back home. It's similar with music in a sense. It's like you start out in this musical spot, and then you go on an adventure, and then you come back to the source and hopefully learn something and grew in some way along the process.
Well, the last thing that I want to talk about, and it seems like we're probably due to have more conversations like this. I'll just put that out there. So
I think we should, yeah.
Yeah, make this kind of a series, because there's so much more. But this we've talked a little bit about the concept of groove, and you've played in a bunch of different bands throughout your career, and have had different experiences and different outlets and different genres, even depending on what the demand is for. But this idea of groove, I mean, it's a really mostly a musical term. But when I say the word groove, I refer to it more as a teamship feeling. So whether you're in a musical group, or on a sports team, or in a business, or part of a family, this idea of being in the groove, which is like peak collective performance, flowing together, achieving a flow state together with a goal, some sort of goal of success. But as a musician, you can be in a flow state, like as you often are when you're playing, and just sort of losing yourself in your music, and the listener knows that you are in flow. But when you're in a band and there's more than one, let's just say it's 4 people at least playing together, you might achieve flow, but your counterparts may just be feeling a little grim, or just mailing it in or just showing up and going through the motions. You know it when everybody's, when you hit that groove point, when everybody is just on, and you don't need to speak to each other. You can just like non-verbally communicate, not just through your music, but through subtle facial gestures and body language. And but talk about that. Like, how does that feel as a musician when you're just like, wow, I don't think any of us are actually standing on the ground right now. We're all levitating, and you can tell that the audience knows, and it's just like that peak collective performance. How do you get there, and what do you think the elements of groove are and the ingredients that go into it?
Well, I think that there's kind of an underlying goal when it comes to being a musician in a band, or by yourself for that matter, that you learn your craft as well as you can, and you get it to where it's just kind of second nature, and then you can forget about it. Like, you have all of your tools, and in the beginning you're focusing on them and you're perfecting things, but then at some point it just becomes you, and you just let go of that. And when you get a group of people together in that situation, it's insanely powerful, because you all kind of have this subconscious set of tools that you're not really focusing on, more so as you're focusing on playing this song together. And then ideally the song becomes the vehicle that you're all riding in, and you don't really think about it in terms of skill or execution anymore. You're just thinking about, you're kind of riding this wave together. And it's not just music too, it's just anybody working in a team sense. There's this way of entering a place where it's like, it's flow, it's groove, and it's something so powerful and healing. I mean, there's healing in that. When I was playing drums I played drums in a dance Motown funk band for a while called the Cookies. And I absolutely love playing drums. To me, that's like the most groove you can get for me, because, well, for one, I don't have to, it's kind of more primitive one-dimensional, or, it's not one-dimensional, but you're not thinking of notes as much as you're thinking about just driving the bus and just riding this rhythmic wave. So, I mean, there was moments in that band where, I mean, we were basically riding a spaceship together, is what it feels like. Everybody is so proficient in what they do that it's almost like a level of telepathy. Like you were saying, like, you don't have to speak to each other. You can make the smallest face gesture or make nothing. I mean, things will happen in the music that prompt you to go where you go next, and you're not really thinking about it as much as you're just feeling it. And then the other concept of that is, what kind of effect does that have on your relationship with these people in this group too? Because, I mean, some of the greatest bands in the world are people who have a hard time getting along off stage, yet they enter that flow state with each other, and they're able to, like, kind of wipe out everything else. So it's almost a meditation in a sense, like a group meditation. Yeah. And I think it's a way to kind of get away from ego and put ego in the background and be truly in the moment. I mean, it's one of the most powerful forms of meditation, in my opinion.
Yeah. So as a drummer, I would say it's probably rare to have a band where, if the lead guitarist couldn't make it, the drummer could step in and cover for them. It's not typical, right? But that just popped in my head, like, oh man, our guitarist isn't showing up, but Jake, the drummer, is going to step in and do an even better job at it. That's probably pretty rare in a band to have a drummer that's that versatile. But that wasn't my point. If you're the drummer, you can, like, you're the make or break of the song in a way. Like, if you're slightly off, you're just gonna F everything up big time.
Yeah. I mean, great band can sound terrible with a bad drummer.
yeah. And even a pretty good drummer can still like mess it up, just being just slightly out of sync, or even mid tune. If you're just like, your mind drifts off and you're just like, well, where am I? So there's like, you are driving the bus. Like, as you said, there's an aspect to achieving groove that somebody's putting down that the rhythm of it, or they're not. And then everything else sort of starts to layer on that. Getting that right is so important. I think that obviously shows up in your guitar playing, that you're also a drummer. Like
Yeah, I definitely think that, like, any amount of instruments you play, that instrument's going to affect the way you play another instrument, and vice versa. And when it comes to guitar, I definitely feel like drumming has given me a better perspective on rhythm when it comes to guitar. But then, also being a keyboard player or a bass player, that has a different effect on the way you think about guitar. So, I mean, and I've had the luck to kind of grow up in a musical setting where becoming a multi-instrumentalist was just a natural thing to progress. But it is pretty wild how all of these instruments complement each other. And when you do have a tool kit that you're able to do all of those things and step in certain situations and stuff, it makes things easier, but it also makes things harder in a sense too, because you kind of become this jack of all trades, and your thinking can become scattered. I mean, like, if I'm thinking in guitar player terms while I'm playing the drums, and I'm listening to the guitar player and being critical in my mind of what's happening with him, that could throw me off a little bit. So it's like you kind of have this three-dimensional perspective of everything happening at the same time. And you just you have to ride it in the correct way.
Yeah. So I have this concept of what the ingredients for groove, and I want to lay it out for you and just get there are 5 components in my thinking, and I could be totally wrong, and this is a work in progress, but I want to list them and just get your just unfiltered response to each of them. That is a little game, like word association game. Yeah. So the concept is groove, and these are the 5 ingredients, and at the end I'll tell you, they spell a handy acronym. I won't tell you in advance. So the first one, you touched on it immediately, is talent, right? So in your team, there's the presumption that everybody's bringing talent, right? A skill set, as you referred to it. So we talked about that, but you assume that your band members they know what they're doing with their given instrument, or if it's a sports team or a business team, the accountant knows how to do accounting, and the bass player knows how to play the bass proficiently at some minimum level. So kind of touched on that, but talent is a general presumption for groove, I would assume, right? If you're thinking about it as I'll try to limit it to a musical group, but just keep in mind this could be any kind of team that we're talking about.
Yeah, each component within the team has, it's assumed that they are proficient in what they do, and they're a cog in a well-oiled machine, ideally.
Yeah, so you have to have that kind of assumption of talent. It's not just like, hey, here's a guitar, we're going to groove, and they're like, oh, how does this work? You're not going to groove if you're missing one piece of that talent. So the next ingredient is optimism. This is a little more like, pie in the sky kind of thing. Talent is very nitty gritty, but optimism, you're coming into this arrangement, agreement, team setting, with a hopeful outlook that this is gonna work, as opposed to maybe pessimism if you're pessimistic. And so there's a future perspective, there's a predictive aspect to optimism, hopefulness, and a futures thinking that this is going to work out, that we're going to achieve groove. that could be really disruptive if you come into it as a pessimist. Like, oh man, this is gonna suck. This is going nowhere.
Right.
Like, you probably won't get there if that's your approach. So the optimistic aspect, I think, is an ingredient to achieving groove. But what do you think of that? Is that
Yeah. No, that's
resonate?
that's huge. And if you go into it with any fear of failure, I mean, that's going to inherently have an effect on your performance massively.
Right. So fear and pessimism kind of fit a little bit, and optimism and hope kind of fit together.
Yeah.
So that resonates. So the third ingredient I call wonder. So sort of a curiosity and it sort of ties a little bit with optimism, but a playfulness, an openness to not knowing, the awe and the wonder of life, really. But in a musical setting, just like, hey, I'm open to be transformed here, and the wonder of it all, the appreciation and the awe for what we're about to do, as potentially we're going to groove, and I'm ready for the wonder of it. I think that's an ingredient to groove as well. So you got talent, optimism, and wonder so far.
That, I mean, I don't want to pick favorites, but that's probably my favorite.
Yeah, I thought so. I could tell that about you.
Most of the stuff that drives me is just, is wonder for living, and the magical nature of the unknown, and it is mixed with optimism kind of on its own. If you have optimism and wonder in any area of life, that's a catalyst for continued fuel in your machine. So yeah, I think those so far, I think you're hitting the nail on the head.
I'm all about efficiency, but I don't think I could condense wonder into optimism, or optimism into wonder, and shrink the list of ingredients in the recipe. I think if you subverted wonder to optimism, or vice versa, you'd be missing something. So I'm all about the words, and I need to keep them separate. So the talent, the optimism, and the wonder is not redundant.
No, I don't think so at all. I just think it's a very powerful pair. The two of those things, for sure.
So the fourth ingredient is empathy, and you touched on that a little bit. Like off stage, you might, not get along, but there at least is an empathy for the other members of your group, where you're empathetic towards their reality and what drives them, and you have a sort of an understanding. Even if there's conflict, there is empathy for your fellow players in the band, or on the team, or in your unit. And that empathy, I think, is part of it. And if you're a sociopath, then if there's a sociopath in your band, the chances of achieving groove go down significantly, which is the definition of no empathy, is sociopathy. And so empathy is another ingredient towards groove that I put in the recipe. So talent, optimism, wonder, and empathy. So
there's always got to be that kind of awareness of other people's struggle. And I mean, even if it is like a butting of heads in a group, be it a band or anything else, if you can maintain a sense of the setting that you're in, the situation that you're in, as like, okay, there's going to be a butting of heads just because of the nature of this situation, and have compassion for that, and knowing that that's going to be a dynamic, and work from that place of like, okay, we're going to hit roadblocks as far as, us maybe getting along, or those types of interpersonal conflicts that arise, and just maintaining a place above that where you're not fully consumed by it when it happens, or nobody in the band is, ideally. That's really hard to get. But yeah, if you can remain in that state of compassion, empathy, sympathy, I think those are insanely powerful in a band, because people are going to screw up, people are going to have struggles, and it's just the nature. It's just the nature of life, really. So I mean, I've always had the. Sometimes I feel like I've had it where I've been empathetic to a fault sometimes, but where there's a place where you should draw the line and be like, okay, maybe I don't want to associate with that person rather than try to help them.
Well, that would imply that maybe the empathy is not reciprocated, and there could be a lack of empathy that could impede the achievement of groove. And it's not your lack of empathy; it could be the lack of empathy among your teammates.
Right.
But there's another aspect of empathy that extends to, and then I think you have it strongly, your empathy and your understanding of how each member of the team does what they do. And so because you are proficient in many instruments, you have a certain kind of empathy for the drummer when you're playing the guitar, and vice versa, or the keyboardist or the bass player. That is an appreciation and an empathy for their understanding of their talent, whether it's your talent or not.
Yeah.
And that will propel you towards that groove state, because you appreciate, wow, that drum kit is massive, and my teammate is dominating that kit and doing a great job. So you have empathy for appreciation and empathy and understanding for what they're doing while you're doing your thing really well too.
Yeah. Yeah. When you've dipped your feet into all the aspects of, each component in the band, there is, and I haven't really thought about that until you bring it up right now, but it makes perfect sense, because you kind of hear what they do, and you get a sense of what led them to where they are on their musical path, and the thing that's happening in the moment, why it's happening, because you've been there too. You've been in their shoes. That's kind of powerful. And the other thing about that is, like, being in a studio setting, I think the multi-instrumentalist thing being a multi-instrumentalist has been one of the most contributing factors to me having a draw to the studio and wanting to produce, and knowing how those pieces fit together and why they fit together. And one of my favorite, probably my favorite thing to do as somebody in the field of music in general, is work with another musician in the studio and try to create something between each other's knowledge and just producing. I wouldn't call it coaching, because you're kind of co-creating is more of what it could be called. But there's such joy when you hit these certain moments within working with somebody in the studio, and you're on this level and you understand each other, and it can get so abstract. There's sessions I've been in where, like, you kind of sense the way that the situation needs to be handled based on who you're working with. So one of my great friends, we were making a record, actually with the Cookies, that band I was playing drums in, and we had a vocal session where he was really struggling, but we tapped into this place, and it took forever to break through to that place. But like, it came down to it where it was like, we had to do this visual. We didn't have to, but I kind of came up with this visualization as he's singing these tracks of like putting orbs of light in certain parts of his body. And like, you almost tap into each other on a physical level, especially when you're a singer and you know what it feels like to get that note out. And then you have somebody else in the booth singing, and you kind of know how the body has to feel to make that happen. And entering that space with somebody is one of the most rewarding things as far as anything, within the realm of relationships. And it's so healthy and medicinal. And it just brings this insane amount of positivity into the relationship, where you become brothers and sisters with people very quick when you're producing together. And that to me is one of the most powerful things about being in groove and making music with a team of people.
Well, that was like the best description of empathy I think I've ever heard. You just describing helping someone sing well by getting inside of their physical body. I mean, literally, that's right there. That is the definition of empathy, and with that goal of creating, you know, beauty through music,
Yeah.
and grooving, and because it takes the music to the next level. So the fifth ingredient, according to my sort of construct, is resilience. So the R, resilience. You may have, if you take the first letter of each of the 5 ingredients, it spells tower, somewhat coincidentally. Easy for me to remember the ingredients because there's a word. So it's the tower of groove. But resilience, which kind of goes nicely with the cookies and you know, the funk soul aspect, the tower of groove sort of is a useful term. But resilience is like, mistakes happen, and mistakes don't just freeze everything. Like a mistake, you know, they say if you practice the mistakes become the music, which is horrific in a classical setting. But in fact, maybe the goal in a improv jazz setting, like the mistake becomes the music and it makes better music.
Right. There's a saying that in jazz, if you make a mistake, make sure you do it a couple more times.
Yeah, exactly. You bend it around so it you know, it is now part of your repertoire. And and that's kind of the resilience, you know, whether it's on or off stage, the relationship side, the conflict side. It's like you have to, you know, if the Beatles fell apart every time they got into an argument, poor us, like the human condition would be diminished because of that. So being resilient in yourself, but being resilient as a group and getting through, you know, the hard spots, the you know, the disasters, the heartbreaks, the breakdowns, you know, the red mind and the gray mind. But then also midstream, you know, there's mistakes happen, but pulling back and overcoming. So you might be in the middle of a song, might be in the middle of a set, could be in the middle of a game. Somebody gets injured, you've got a bench that you can rely on. You got spare guitar strings, but that all those tools for resilience come into play that allow groove to be achieved. Because you know, if you hit a mistake and you stop and you're not resilient, then you're never going to groove. But if you have that resilience, right? You know, lots of examples probably come up as a musician, both in the, you know, in performance, but also in process of preparing, whether it's making an album or performing a show, where resilience is just is a key component of the creative process and performative process, the act of performing. And without that resilience, you might really never get there, you know, to that groove state, you know, never. Because, you know, the first time you get together, you got, maybe it's 5 talented individuals. Day one, you can assume everybody has talent, but you're not sure about anything else.
Right.
And then resilience, before you get to groove as a group, you might be really lucky and hit that groove somehow, some way, like on day one, but chances are not. Chances are it takes some time, which will require resilience and overcoming some of the getting to know each other stages, or trusting each other and building the empathy, and coming back and coming back and coming back and trying again, and rewriting, tweaking things, listening to each other. But resilience seems to be a fundamental ingredient that's not redundant with the other 4 ingredients.
Well, I think it's probably, I mean, the other 4 ingredients are a precursor to the idea of resilience. I mean, I think if you put those other things in check, that's going to naturally, you know, make one be resilient. And I mean, yeah, especially when you think of like optimism. I mean, all of them really, just like those things stacked on each other. That's a great recipe to create resilience. So it's a great way to end the acronym, I think. And
Yeah, a good base, right, for
yeah.
the recipe.
And yeah, I think where you draw your resilience from is interesting. You know, I know we were talking about this the other day, was something being causing so many challenges and so many people telling you you can't do something, or like you hit so many snags that like at some point you trudge through in spite of it. You trudge through because it's like, no, we're going to make it work and it's going to happen. But you're not doing it in a cynical way. You're doing it with optimism and wonder, because like, I mean, the wonder is insane fuel to me personally. And then pairing that with those other things, I mean, yeah, I think resilience is going to naturally come out of that.
Yeah. Well, I love that insight that, you know, resilience is a cumulative ingredient in a way. It's like a part of the others, and also its own ingredient. So that's my recipe for groove, and you know, each of those ingredients probably has subcomponent ingredients, and you know, like humility plays in different, you know, in the resilience, but those are my five. The Tower of Groove is built on those five ingredients, and I love exploring the concept with you and through the musical lens, because I see it through different, you know, Saving Sea Turtle lens, or the Chicago Bulls and Michael Jordan lens, but through the musical lens, it's very insightful to talk about it with you. I appreciate that.
That's so cool. And likewise too, I mean, like, same with Blue Mind. I mean, you're putting titles and cohesiveness around ideas that like I inherently feel in me, but I've never like looked at them and like unpacked them into a thing that I can look at. And like with this, you know, Tower of Groove idea, I mean, it's like you just broke down all of the same belief structure that like keeps me going as a person. And I've never, I mean, like, that's such a cool way to look. I mean, that's a book in itself right there. It's a,
It will be.
Yeah.
I know. You're going to be in it, my
Nice.
brother.
I'd be flattered. I'd be truly flattered. But I mean, I think that would be, oh man. Yeah, if you wrote a book like that, I think you could give that to any team member. I mean, that could be the next 7 highly effective habits of, you know, or 7 habits of highly effective people for any team person. Because I mean, yeah, you just broke down basically my creed into these perfect points.
And you know, we need to get our groove on, like as a species. I mean, we're not there right now. Like we're all struggling, you know, and Blue Mind is one way to help ourselves so that we can groove again together. I mean, Blue Mind is a very individualistic practice that helps us relate with each other and is improved when we do it together. But this idea of groove is, it's not just to win games and make great music. It's also to, you know, function as a society, or function as a community, or as the town, as a nation, even at the higher levels, I guess. And you know, if you pull out any of those ingredients, your community falls apart. You know, without talent, you know, forget it. Without empathy, forget it. Without resilience, forget it. Whether you're talking about your rock and roll band, or your nation, you know, or your business, your basketball team. So
I was thinking about this while you were talking about the acronym and the points within it. You know, how do you deal with somebody in the team that isn't exhibiting all those things, or maybe like partially exhibiting them, and then like will fall into like gray mind? I mean, it's like that, and then that kind of made a bridge to the gap to me, where like, okay, I mean, Blue Mind is really a conduit for all of those things within this new concept of groove that you're talking about. Like if somebody's having a hard time with those things, Blue Mind is a great foundation to take them to and start from there. So I don't think it's any coincidence that that book is the precursor to this kind of more narrow thing.
Yeah, I mean, the concept of groove has grown out of my thinking about Blue Mind, I think. But that point of yours that, so if you're in a band and somebody's just not participating in your goal, which is groove, you can replace them. If you're in a family, you can't necessarily replace them,
right?
Not easily. Like, Uncle Bob isn't, a good participant. Well, Uncle Bob's not going away. And no offense to anybody who has an Uncle Bob. But in a community, it's kind of the same thing. It's, there's no off the island. You don't get kicked out of the band. You don't get replaced as power forward on your basketball team. You're part of the community. So it kind of depends on what kind of team you're talking about. You might just get kicked out off the team and
right.
replace with somebody who has talent, empathy, so on. But if you can't replace that individual for whatever reason, then you need to help them. And that's resilience, and that's empathy. That's where those come into play. Maybe Blue Mind is one way to help them get out of the red mind or gray mind, help them grow, help them improve their talent, help them be more optimistic, less pessimistic. Yeah, that's a really good point. As I dig more into groove, I'll have to call you, and we'll discuss it more.
Yeah. Well, it's like I think of all of the. I mean, like I said, you kind of broke down my order of operations in a way with those points. But then I think of, okay, well, what has challenged those within my time working with teams? What have been the main contributing factors to somebody being a candidate for being cut from the team? And then how far do you go down? How far can you lead them until you say, okay, it's not going to work?
Right.
And yeah, I mean, like, how much of an empathy rabbit hole can you go down? And then at the same time, how can you let the person go in a loving way if it has to be done? I mean, there's like so many weird things within that. And like I said, I mean, I've been guilty of being empathy to a fault in situations where I've gotten myself in trouble because, I'm still trying to help somebody that is causing a negative impact on my life from them just being there. So, I mean, how do you reach the ultimate point of like helping, doing the right thing, helping somebody, but also where do you draw the line? It's an interesting question.
Well, and I think just having that acronym and having that list of ingredients is a clarifying, it's not the be all and end all of like how we work together as teams, but it's clarifying and useful. And that's, my drive is to create useful words. And so I even put that on my website. That's my, I work in words the way you work in music. And I hope that what I do with words is useful to people who can put it to use in whatever way, shape, or form. And so this idea of groove and the Tower acronym, the goal is to put these words together in a way that's useful to teams who are trying to achieve groove in whatever realm that they're working in, whether it's governance or familial cohesiveness or an artistic pursuit or sports related performance. And so, maybe it's just a clarifying thing. And if you go through this process, this conversation that we just did, it may clarify something like, okay, Uncle Bob needs to go. uh,
They don't-
Uncle Bob is a crap bass player. I'm sorry, it's just not, it's not working. Or just a jerk, and it's not. I can't fix it. So that's, and if that's clarifying and you can make that move and make that decision more clearly because you've got these words to define it, that's what I'm trying to put into the world here. So,
Right.
But thank you for those insights. It's really helpful.
Oh man, I think it's I think it's, I'm serious. I think it's like textbook manual for life type of stuff that you're exploring.
Yeah.
My question is like, how do you get the absorption? How can you get that to people who struggle with humility and are able to absorb it and use its benefits?
Yeah.
I mean, I keep thinking of like the bands that I'm in and the people who cause attention in the band and these points, and like, these would be great if this person could embrace this. How do you get that person to embrace it in a loving way that's not like, do this, like.
Well, I think so. There's you're off the island component, or if you're in agreement that there's the goal is groove, and these are the ingredients, and not everybody has all the ingredients at the same time, right? So your talent may be catching up to somebody else's. Your empathy may be low and their empathy may be high. You may be the optimistic person that day, but that may carry the group. And so it's not that everybody has equal amounts of every ingredient. Just like in a recipe, it varies a little bit. You've got different nuances and it changes day to day, week to week, year to year. It's like, think about the Beatles. Like, I'm sure there were days that, George Harrison was not optimistic, but somebody else was that day, and it carried the groove. And so that's part of it. So maybe there's an ebb and flow of the ingredients among team members that help carry each other. But that, and if somebody is 0 for 5, they're off the island, clearly. But if you have like tons of talent and then you suck at everything else, maybe the rest of the team members can accommodate for that, and that, but you still need that some level of all 5 ingredients to achieve that group state and that performance.
And there is kind of a joy and enjoyment to being maybe the one with the optimism that day and trying to pull your friends into that place. And I mean, just the implementing of those things in situations where it needs it. I mean, that's an enjoyment in itself. It makes the painting of life more colorful. I mean, to have those kind of, it's like we we're talking about the other day where polarization gets ratings. It's like, you got to have a little bit of that back and forth to, that creates, out of that comes positive things a lot of the time.
And also the recognition that there are suboptimal, dysfunctional teams in the world. Like, and you may be on one sometimes. You could find yourself in a band that never grooves,
right?
But makes music. Certainly, like it's music, and it's fine, but you never groove. You never achieve that. And there are lots of suboptimal teams in sports, in music, like in business, that they're making widgets. They're not grooving. They exist. And boy, they sure maybe would love to groove, but they don't. Even communities that are, dysfunctional, suboptimal, not grooving, they're still communities. So doesn't mean you don't exist. Doesn't mean you have no value. Just means you're not in a groove state, which, is not sustainable. You can't be Like you can't wake up in the morning in a groove state and stay in a groove state all day and night, day after day, week after week as a team. That's exhausting. So, I think the goal of this concept of groove is it is by definition an occasional phenomenon that is transcendent, but is not constant.
Right.
It's like it's flowing together and it's a peak performance mode, but you don't live in it.
Right.
I mean, maybe like the Dalai Lama and his buddies live in it. I don't know, but I'd say relatively few humans live in a constant groove state.
Right. Yeah,
I don't know. Maybe.
I think the closest thing, well, not the closest thing, but the best place you could be without being in constant groove state is in complete awareness of what state you're in at all times.
Yeah, and sometimes you don't want to be in a groove state. You just want to be alone and quiet, and that's great. But when you are working with a team and you are trying to achieve that optimal transcendent performance that makes the world better and moves the needle and evolves us, that's wins the championship or whatever the case may be. It's probably a good idea to understand what goes into that. And that's, I guess, the goal.
Right.
Yeah. Well, cool. Well, this has been groovy, for lack of a better word. Yeah.
Well, cool, man. I guess I'll let you get back to your day.
Yeah, likewise.
Back to reality we go. Yeah.
Cool.
Have a wonderful rest of your day, Jay.
Yeah, you too. All right. Thank you.